Okay, so in the last video we went over a high-level overview of the arrangement view that you see in front of you now. In this video we're going to be talking about these rows of buttons that you see at the top. So we're going to go from left to right. You'll see on the extreme left we have two small squares. Now if we hover over those in info view it explains what they do. So the sync in indicator, this indicator flashes when live receives usable MIDI sync messages. External sync is activated using the X switch to the left. So don't worry too much about that just yet. Sync out indicator, again, something we don't need to worry about just yet. To the right of that we have tap. 1, 2, 3, 4. When we tap this, you'll see the number to the right of it changes, and that is actually setting the tempo. It's a tap tempo button. So if you're not sure exactly what the tempo is, you don't know what number to type in here, you can just tap out a tempo. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that tempo is around 72 BPM, beats per minute. Or we can click and drag up and down here to set our tempo. Alternatively, we can just type in a tempo like 128 BPM. To the right of the tempo control, you'll see that we have these two buttons that have a lot of vertical lines on them. So the first one on the left is the tempo nudge down. Now, Ableton Live was initially created for recording live music into a computer. So it has a lot of features that enable you to use it with live instruments, and this is one of them. This is also a feature that allows you to work with Ableton when you're DJing. So Ableton has evolved to become useful for not only music production, but also DJing as well. So what does the tempo nudge down button do? Well, let's imagine you have Ableton over here, a computer running Ableton Live and sounds coming out of it. And over here you have a couple of turntables and you're mixing records. Imagine if you want to mix in what's happening in Ableton Live, so it comes out the speakers with those turntables and what's being heard from them. So you need to get it in sync with what's being played on the turntables, and it's a bit like slowing down a record a little bit to get it in sync with the other record. If you've ever seen people DJ or if you've DJed yourself, that's what the tempo nudge down button does. Tempo nudge up is like spinning the record a little bit faster to speed it up. Okay, to the right of that we have our time signature, and if you're making electronic music, then 99% of the time you'll probably be working with a 4/4 time signature, or 4 beats in a bar. To the right of that we have the metronome. So by default the metronome is deactivated, but if I click on it to enable it, you'll see it turns yellow, and when I press the spacebar to play, there's our metronome. We also have this drop down arrow to the right of the metronome, and that allows us to set a count in. So it can be none, and what happens there is, say that you can see we've got this flashing orange line at 17 bars. If I press record, it just starts recording from the 17th bar immediately. But if I set the count in to 1 bar and hit record, you can see that it counts in for 1 bar before it actually starts recording. That gives you time to prepare and get ready in position on your MIDI keyboard, or get ready on your guitar to start jamming out some crazy beats. So that's really useful. I usually have mine set to 1 bar, sometimes 2 bars, and that's usually enough time for me to get in position and get ready to start jamming out. Okay, to the right of that, what we have is the quantization menu. Now, quantization is when you play something, you play a melody on your MIDI keyboard, for example, but you're a terrible pianist like me, and your melody is played really badly out of time. So you can actually use this quantization menu to set a quantization parameter. For example, if I set the quantization to 1/16ths of a bar, then as I play in a terribly out of time melody, Ableton is going to interpret where the notes should be placed and shift them left or right to make them perfectly in time within a 1/16 of a bar grid. I can also set that to 1/16 with a third. I can set it to eighths, I can set it to eighths thirds, and so on and so forth. Very useful. Okay, so in this next section in our transport controls, we have here this button. It looks like it has an arrow pointing to the right. What that is our follow button. So let me show you what that does. Let's say that we're playing through the timeline from left to right, and eventually the play line, this flashing orange line, moves off the screen. There you go, you can't see it anymore. But if I click on follow button, then now it stays in the middle of the screen and the arrangement is moving to the right. So that's very useful. To the right of that we have the arrangement position. So right now it says that the position of this vertical line is at the 22nd bar, at the 4th beat, at the 2nd 16th. So that's bars, beats and 16ths. And we can change the position. So if I type in 20, it will move back to the 20th bar. 21 1. We can also set it to 1 1 1, or we can just double click on stop and that will reset it back to 1 1 1. Then we have play, stop and record. This plus sign means overdub. So that means, imagine if you record in a melody and then you want to record some other notes on top of that melody on the same track, you would click on overdub and that would allow you to overdub or record over the top of what you've just recorded. To the right of that we have the automation arm and then the re-enable automation buttons. We'll talk more about automation later in the course, so don't worry about it just yet. And then to the right of that we have another section of buttons. So the one that's activated right now is the loop switch. And with the loop switch activated, this is our loop brace. And you can see that it's looping over and over again and again. But if I turn that off, then it stops looping and it will just play from left to right, and it will keep heading to the right for all of eternity. To the left and right of the loop switch, we also have a punch in switch and a punch out switch. So these are used for recording. Let's imagine that I want to record 2 bars of music from the 17th bar to the 19th bar. So what I can do is I can activate the punch in switch to say at the 17th bar on the first beat, on the first 16th, I want Ableton to start recording music. And then I can activate the punch out switch and set the length of the recorded area to be 2 bars. So I can change that to be just 1 bar if I want. And let's see what happens. If I go back here to the 15th bar and hit record, it's not recording yet, but when it gets to 17th, see, it left in a MIDI clip. We'll talk more about MIDI clips later on, but it started recording the MIDI clip when I told it to at the start of the 17th bar, and it recorded a MIDI clip for a duration of 1 bar. Okay, so the punch in and the punch out switches are very useful when you're recording music. To the right of that we have another set of buttons here. So the first one is our draw mode switch, and you can activate that by pressing B. And what that does is it gives you a kind of pencil tool that allows you to draw in notes, which is different to just having this arrow cursor. We'll look at that more when we start looking at MIDI clips later on. To the right of that we have a button that looks a bit like a piano keyboard. And that's because when this is activated, this turns your computer keyboard into a MIDI keyboard. That means it allows you to use your computer keyboard to actually play notes in a melody as if your computer keyboard was a piano. So that's very useful if you don't have a MIDI controller just yet. To the right of that we have key map mode switch. So by activating this, you'll see what this does later on. We don't need to get into it just yet. And then to the right of that, we have the key MIDI in indicator and the key MIDI out indicator. Don't need to worry about that just yet either. To the right of that, we have MIDI map mode. And this allows us to map different parameters from a MIDI controller to control different parameters within Ableton Live, but we don't need to worry about that just yet. To the right of that, we have your CPU load meter. So right now it says 0%. And sometimes this will get very high, or if it gets to 100%, that means you're using 100% of the available CPU that is available for Ableton to use from your computer. So the more powerful your computer is, with the faster the processing speed and the more cores it has for processing, the lower this number will stay. Even when you start having quite a lot of different tracks with lots of different devices on them and lots of different calculations happening all at the same time to play out the music that you've created. To the right of that, we have the hard disk overload indicator. So that lights up if Live was not able to load the audio from the disk in time. So you don't really want to see that lit up. And then to the right of that, you'll see we have two very small squares. And this is the MIDI track in indicator and the MIDI track out indicator. So that flashes when Live's tracks send MIDI messages and receive MIDI messages. So that is a detailed explanation of what all these buttons do in the top row. And I'll see you in the next video.